Bem, boa noite a toda a gente. Hoje vamos ter o primeiro momento de 4 momentos de um trabalho que o Pisitakun está a desenvolver connosco na Rua do Sol. Vão ser 3 momentos, 2 de conversa, um mais ligado à música e um último momento, uma exposição final do trabalho que ele está a desenvolver por cá. O Pisitakun está a trabalhar está a fazer um painel comparativo dos movimentos revolucionários que existiram na Tailândia e com os portugueses. A escolha dele é baseada na situação atual da Tailândia, não é? Porque eles estão neste momento, em 2015 tiveram um golpe militar. É um país com uma monarquia, mas que tinha um parlamento. Mas em 2015 houve um golpe militar, neste momento os militares governam o país, o rei vive mais na Alemanha do que na Tailândia e estão a viver de certa forma numa ditadura militar. E por isso interessa-lhe tanto ir buscar estes movimentos revolucionários para os trazer para o presente para o dia-a-dia da Tailândia, não é? Poder manter essa ideia de que as mudanças são possíveis, de que é possível mudar ou lutar contra regimes totalitários, sejam eles quais forem, né? Pronto. Hoje o Pisitakun convidou o professor Thanom, que é um professor universitário em Bangkok, é historiador, curador e crítico de arte e trabalha também dentro destes temas. E temos também connosco o João Pimenta, também historiador e músico, que nos vai também falar um pouco dos movimentos revolucionários que existiram em Portugal no século XX. Vou só passar a palavra ao Pisitakun. So, you want to speak a bit about the work, no? Okay. E depois passamos para o professor Thanom, que fará uma apresentação mais ou menos de 30 minutos, e depois passamos para o João.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm like Pisitakun Kuantalaeng. This was like for this project, like when I came to residency, the artist residency here, like I try to think about like how was the relationship between like the Portuguese and Thai, and I was found this kind of like the energy of like the revolution. It was like because in Thailand now we have this kind of movement that was called like inside like the three finger that was used in like a different way there is actually come from the movie, right? But now we have this kind of symbolic for like Thailand and Myanmar. We use the same this kind of symbolic, and it was like now we all country, I mean like Myanmar and Thailand, now we still on fighting with this kind of military coup or like military government in like the one that come to coup d'etat in our country. And for sure it's like in Thai we have a bit complicated for like we have the monarchy also. And then like the one that I try to think about like when I live here, I try to make the artwork that relate with like the history of like the Portuguese also, like when they had the revolution in 1974. That was in this kind of like, you know, dictator in the way. And yeah, I want to find a way how this kind of true history is happened right now and they happened before. It was how it's like what happened and what how to relate with this kind of thing. And today I just like invite like the one guy, the professor from Bangkok. His name Thanom Chapakdee, and like say he invite another guy from here and to talk about like Portuguese history. And I think it's like yeah, I hope like everyone can see how was different or how was the new future for our country. I mean in Thai or I mean like for this kind of thing, I think it will be for everyone. I mean it's not only Thai or Myanmar or or Portuguese, but I think this kind of thing can be useful for in the future. Yeah.
Okay, now we go to
Yeah.
Professor. No.
And the first talk will be Thanom Chapakdee. Okay.
Hello. Good morning in Thailand and good evening in Portugal. So during the talk, today in afternoon in Bangkok, we are organized to protest against the sphere of dictatorship of Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha. And in the evening, police riot come to shooting our group on the street nearby the parliament, nearby the House of Government. So still, in Thailand now it's 1 o'clock of 26th of September. The police still around in Bangkok. This is what's happened in Thailand. Of course, in Portugal, it's not the same. So I like to talking about the background of Thailand. Since 1930 until now, we have 13 coup d'etat. It means in 6 years we have a coup d'etat. It's all around. It's very, very. It's become more and more a sensitive of the people, and also in our region in Southeast Asia. It's not usual in the country like in Portugal or in Europe to see how the military regime try to control the people. It's not now. For me, it's not only the military regime in Thailand, but it's by a monarchy system. There's only one left in Southeast Asia. This is a big barrier, it's a big burden, it's a big problematic when military regimes and monarchy system twist together. And using the religions, Buddhists, become the one of the thing. That's why in Thailand we call, for me, I call Buddhocentrism. It means military, monarchy, and Buddhists become the one and ruling making the ruler the country and dominate the people. All the art is not exactly what we call art. Art, fine art, or traditional art in Thailand is become the one of icon. People must be respect, believe, and being on faith on the art object. So this has become a problematic and very a paradox one between the movement of the art and the movement of the society and the mode of life of the people. So I like to dealing with the things happen. Why we are people, ordinary people and the elite people or middle class or high class people is totally different, a big gap. It's not exactly we all talks about the art in the norm of Eurocentric. Elite class or middle class talking art in another term of ordinary people talking about art. So I like to deal with I like to start It's about the art movement since 1950. So you can throw a slide, Pisitakun. Oh, yeah. You can show how the change goes and how the art is become more and more. Yes, that's I say that fine art is become the image of belief and faith, and the respect more than the people can be appreciation. This is a big problem because the elite art, or as I said, the Buddha-centricism, making art as an icon. Is the object to believe and the object to be faithful. So art is not, it's a crime, it's not a certain place to make a pleasure or making a certain of appreciate. This is a big problem. So if we're dealing with this, we can see the image of next slide, please. Next one. Yes. We can see the image of Lord Buddha or the sculpture or the statue. It's not, we cannot say it's a kind of the sculpture. We can say a kind of the icon. The people must be respected. If we can see what is going on in the art movement and the contemporary art, clearly we can see what's happened during 1970 or before that. As I said, in Thailand, it's the rule by military regime or the sphere of dictatorship. We can see the light of democracy just only 10%, but on the list, 90% is a kind of dictatorship ruled by military. As we see, I mean, by the end of 1950, when sorry, Marshal Thanom, is not my name, Thanom Kittikachon, was a prime minister. The country politics was strong, driven by the idea of nationalism due to the fear of the communists around the region, which is growing in the region. The idea of liberalism from the West encouraged the students and people to protest for their freedom of political expression. That even led to the great protest in October 1973. You can see 14 October and student uprising in 1976 on 6 October. So next slide, please. So the art at that time during 70, we can see how different between the two sides of the art movement. One we can call art for life. Why it happened during 70? Because of the idea of art for life is a kind of the people or ordinary people, the oppressing by the state of military. And then the student uprising against the dictatorship, as I say, a general Marshal Thanom Kittikachon. It happened in 14 October 1973 and then 1976. But for those, the artists who run the activity of the arts, they try to show their works talking about how the people in Thailand they are facing the problematics of the poor and how they survive under the dictatorship. But on the other side, I mean the art group of institute like in Silpakon University, they try to facing the ordinary artists to show the poor image of the people and using the abstract to against each other. As you can see, during 1970s until 1980, the art had to separate two camps. One is art for life, and another is art for art's sake. They show the idea of abstract from Americanizations, and another side show the idea of socialist realism from Soviet and China, the main idea. Next slide, please. Yes, this is we show the student uprising in 14 October 1973 is all become the one who fights against the dictatorship. And then all the ruler, I mean dictatorship, Thanom, and Naro is the tyranny, escape from Thailand to far out from Thailand and to asylum in Singapore and Japan. And then they're coming back again they become a monk. So you can see how relation between the religions and the elite amongst in Thailand is a kind of another beyond, and the people they are quite respect the monk as the symbolic of Lord Buddha. So next slide, please. Next, yes. So as I said, the 6th of October in 1976, student uprising again against the dictatorship. And then the government or the military, they took the action as a massive massacre in Thammasat University, nearby Royal Palace. This is a big, very strong sense of traumatics in the country. So right now we are preparing to make an anniversary of 45 years of 6th October in 1976. But the thing is happened. The state, the government not allow us to organize this event, even though Thammasat University not allow us to use the place to organize, to making a 45 year of anniversary. This is a big problem as well. So next slide, please. See, if we can see during 60 and 70, the artists try to show, try to express, try to representations about the poor, it's about the farmer life, it's about the labor life, but the state not allow us to do the image of poor people. This is very a strong sense of doing the artists running the activists. But then during 1980, the state, they quite fear that what's happened for the Thai people because they're afraid of the idea of globalizations come flooding around the globe and also attack Thai identity. So the artists try to balance out the idea of how to apply the idea of religions is in Buddhist become more and more serving the idea of kindness. But on the other side, some artist group, they try to conceptualize the idea of multicultural by using the idea of conceptualized from Eurocentric, like Montien Bunma, like the artists, they are studied in France, in England, in the States, in Germany, and come back to Thailand, and they're doing the style of internationalized style of art world. But on the side, the government supporting the contemporary Thai traditional art like Salamchai, Positipat, as you see in the image. So next slide, please. This is the work of Araya Rajamran Suk. She talking about the dead, and then she reading the books for the dead body in the hospital in Chiang Mai, and also on the another image, she appropriations the image of the impressionist painting to teaching ordinary people. It means she tried to satirical the systematics of art movement in Thailand. This is started by the state. It's quite strong critical one that she shows the image of impressionist painting by Monet, and then they're asking farmer to see and explain what that is happened in the Europe. And then another one is a critique about the state that making the metaphor by dead body and reading the Lord Buddha text to the dead body. It's quite strong sense of a criticism of Thai society during the 80s because being attacked by the idea of a kind of globalization. That is state try to control Thai people by using Thainess. You have to be Thai. You cannot escape from Thainess to the other. So next slide, please. Also, I mean, one of the artists is quite strong influences to Thai art movement at this time is Lergrit Thirawanich. Actually, he is not living in Thailand. He is being around the world because he was born in the Sao Paulo. I can't remember, but he is the sons of the embassy. That's why he can be around the world. But he is studying art, living in New York, and using the idea of Pad Thai, showing an exhibit in New York, and also he using Tom Yam Kung or Kway Tiao or Thai noodle for his exhibition, for his show, that the people can eat and drink and enjoyable about eating of his food. That's why the idea of relational aesthetics is promoted by Lergrit and his colleagues, architect I can't remember his name. That he's a French and support Lergrit to write to do about the idea of relational aesthetics. Yes, Lergrit Tirawanit. Nicolas Bourdieu, yes, together with Lergrit, he's talking about the idea of relational aesthetics, but by using Thai food to show us about how the idea of local become global. This is the Thai state claim that Lergrit is a Thai, but normally Lergrit is not exactly Thai anymore because most of his like traveling around and living outside Thailand. So next slide, please. Yes, I mean, I love talking about idea of the art movement under the state of military regime. I mean, almost as I say that since 1970s until the year 2000, almost the artists who are supported by the government, normally they are doing the art as state apparatus, using the context of monarchy, using the context of religions, using the context of nationalism's idea. But on another side, the artists, they are quite breaking the ground of Thainess being around the world, using the idea of globalization, using the idea of art world to work with their community, like Navin Rawan Chayakut or Sulasi Usonwong. This is, I mean, around the late 90s up to the year 2000, we can see the idea of neo-liberal and facing with the idea neo-nationalism is a clashing. But we show you that this artist is the kind of neo-liberal and using the conceptual idea of community, the idea of exchange object and community art to dealing with his work. Yes, next slide, please. And also, I mean, one thing is happened once around the year 2000, the state or the military trying to control the people. But of course, in the art movement, we're not stuck with the state control. I mean, many artists in the young generation, like Tassanai, Setaseri, Midjai, try to break in spontaneous using the idea of abstract under the layer of their work is the image of monarchy, image of military, but read up, top up with the abstract. I mean, this painting is not just only the painting of abstract by using the color, but the abstract on the top layer, but underneath of their painting is about the context of criticize royal family, military, and criticize the religions. I mean, for Tassanai, his very strong sense of a critical work a critical idea of loyal family and military regime, also Mit Jae-in as well. Yes, but we see in the surface is the abstract. I mean, it's quite more rely on of how we are dealing with the state control, but we try to criticize them. Yes, next please. So not just only the individual artists doing their work to criticize the state, but on the other hand, independent group or alternative artist movement try to organize to criticize the art given support by the government, like they are organized Chiang Mai social installations, breaking the wall of museum, breaking the wall of gallery, organize the art in everywhere in Chiang Mai, in the north of Thailand, in late 90s, but also making art on the street to represent what's happened on the street when the military shooting the people. As you see, the late 90s up to the 2000, we can see art is very a strong sense of reverence themselves to the public space, not just only in the art gallery. And also, not only artists can running the art object, but people can participate in the art sphere as well, like in Chiang Mai social installation, like many events happens around Thailand, not just only Bangkok. It means Bangkok is not the center of art movement again after since the year 2000. Yes. Next, please. So the pinpoint I like to focus on after the coup in 2014, during coup d'etat by Prayut Chan-o-cha, the premier right now, when he proved the government elected by the people in 2014. The things happened that all the artists cannot doing or cannot express, cannot represent, cannot do the art as they want. Because once they change constitutions. Second, when they change, when the King Ramadai passed away and his son get to the throne, they changed the system very strict and very compulsory. People cannot talking about a prohibit. People cannot talking about the king and pass the law they call 112. This is, you cannot talking about monarchy anymore, even though the things, and they are looking people as the dust. So this is making Thailand become a kind of under the dictatorship sphere. People cannot express, the people cannot talking, people cannot making the free speech everything is become a censorship. So last 3 years, the group of the artists organized doing artistic activist movement. We call free art. Pisitakun is the one of the member to run art activists, breaking the rule of art, not just only showing in the talking about idea of art in the gallery, but we bringing art to join the people movement, to join the people with the protest, to join the people with the thing. I mean, more than 100 activists are being jailed right now because they criticize. And then we need to change our country by using or changing constitutions, asking the king or monarchy under the rule of constitutions. Get rid of 112 is the law that they're not allows the people talking or criticize what's happened in Thailand. So, I mean, even though now I'm talking right now, many people are being noticed by the police. Maybe tomorrow they waking up, they can be a prisoner for the law 112. So, I mean, since last 2 years, the protest become more and more plenty and enjoyable with the artistic activist movement. It means that everyone who come to our protest or people protest or mass protest, they can join, they can participate as the artistic practice in the movement. I mean, free art organize the material and ask the people come to places like film, like graffiti, like street graffiti, like painting, or doing a digital image. So, I mean, art and politics, art and activists, art and artistic practice right now is become more and more, I cannot say popular, it's become a tool of people to against the dictatorship. It's become a tool very important for Thai people to using art as the way to criticize, as the way to tear down the power of dictatorship. So art is not mean exactly using or doing by artists. Art is become for the people to making negotiate the power. That's why for me myself call the artistic activist movement as a previous as ethics. It means that doing by people to fight against the dictatorship. We call for the freedom of speech. We call for our life. We call for to preserve our friends who being jailed by the dictatorship. Yes, I want to make conclusions that as the artistic activist movement. We really appreciate and like to join the peoples around the world to tear down the power of monarchy, to tear down the power of military regime, get out from Thailand. And also, we still fighting, not just only COVID-19, but we are fighting with the sphere of the fear that the government tried to create the people like the dust. But we are not yell to them, but we are fighting with our tool as art practice and art activists, as a free art, as Pisitakun Kuantalaeng, doing the project, even though far away from Thailand, even though far away from our friend who still fight right now, but we are artistic activist movement. Yes, thank you very much for your join for the morning talk. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Thanom. Thank you for sharing the last 15 years of the art movement reacting to the social and political problems of Thailand. It was really nice to hear you. Now we have João Pimenta to talk about the revolutionary movement in Portugal. And after, we can open to the public a space if they want to ask something, and we can talk a bit. Okay. Yes. Now I'll pass the word to João.
Hello. Hello. My name is João, and I used to be a history teacher, but not anymore. Not in university, just for little kids. And I don't speak in public for a long time, so sorry if I don't get a current speech, but I'm gonna talk a little bit. My specialty is not 20th century, but medieval history. I know some things about some of the three revolutions that we had in Portugal in the 20th century. These three revolutions ended up with 4 different regimes, each one with different approaches to society and economics and cultural. In terms of art history, I don't know that much. I like art, but I'm not an academic in that subject, not like the professor. So I cannot speak much about art in the 20th century in Portugal. So first I'm going to give, we started up the 20th century with a monarchy in Portugal. We had a king that was killed in Lisbon, in the public square in Lisbon. He was catching up not a train, but a tram with horses, and some 2 anarchists killed him. This king was called Charles II, and he was not the last king of Portugal, but you could say he was the last king. The last king of Portugal went to exile in London, where he died without having any kids. So that was the ending of the monarchy and the ending of that lineage of kings in Portugal. So I have to say that that last king, in terms of politics, maybe it was not very accurate, but he was a great painter. He painted several Alentejo. It's a part of southern Portugal, and I got to say I'm a fan of the guy. And he also was oceanographic explorer. So he went to Chile with the Prince of Monaco, that was his friend, and he was one of the first persons to design some of maritime and biological species from that part of the world. So he's like this kind of Wes Anderson character that was not, he could be a good artist and a good biological marine scientist, but he was a king. Because of that, maybe he's not in the art history of Portugal, maybe because he was a king. That's a shame, because he's really talented, I have to say. But he was killed, like I said, and we had a republic in 5 of October of 1910. We had but revolutions in Portugal, they are not very bloody, I have to say. Normally, like a friend of my father used to say, they are made in one day and nobody gets killed. And that can be good, that can be also bad. There are some political theorists that say that's not a revolution, because there must be some blood and some death involved. But that's not the case. With the monarchy, we really ended up with that, because we killed him, we killed the king, and he killed one of his sons, and the other one went to London. And he was never a menace to the republic. He lived like a dandy lifestyle life. He was friend of actors. He went to vernissage. He had a London life, social life. That's good for him. And he didn't have any kids, so he didn't want to return also. So he died in London. And we had the first Republic of Portugal come from 1910 until 1926. It was 16 years that was a little bit turbulent. We had many governments that were succeeding one to another. The normal duration of a government during that time of 1910 until 1926 was like 4 or 5 months. Each 5 months, a government will fall down, another will come up. That normally ends up with crisis. We also ended up, I don't know why, in First World War. Nobody asked for us to be there, but we wanted to help England. Our great ally and friends. We always give everything to England. They never return anything, but we like to help them. So we send a lot of young people from Portugal. Some of them never pick up a rifle, and before most of them were from little villages. And if you drive around Portugal, it's very normal that you see in the central square of each city a memorial with the names of the people who get killed. And if you see their date of birth, you see that all of them were killed between they were 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. So they went to Belgium, to the worst part of First World War, in the Battle of La Lys. The Battle of La Lys was a battle where 1 million British soldiers were killed, for example. It's one of the biggest bloodsheds that happened in terms of war history. First World War was maybe, in terms of war in the field, maybe more brutal than Second World War. Second World War was pretty brutal, as you know, but First World War was like the first modern war and maybe the last old war. There were still like battalions using horses against battalions that were using for the first time. So it was a war that was basically fought between France and Belgium. And that came up with a big, for us, for Portugal, was pretty bad, because there was, in the part of the military, they quite didn't understand why we were there. So there was this kind of insatisfaction of the military for the regime. The democratic regime was not going well. So in 1926, we had a military coup that started in the north of Portugal, in Braga, that's near Porto. So the militaries, like, they walk for several kilometers. It's, I don't know the distance, but it's like, by car is 4 hours driving. They went by foot and horse, and they went to Lisbon, and they made the military coup when they ended up the regime The first republic ended up in 1926, in 28th of May. There were several, back then in 1928, these militaries were a part of the regime that were more conservative, maybe with the connection with the whole monarchy. You see, they were they were Catholic in the worst sense of the word. They didn't want they wanted to make, how you say, Portugal had a huge debt to the other countries back then in 1926. We were basically bankrupt. And they hired up a guy that was a university teacher of economics. And they invited him to be the Minister of Finances. So this guy that was called Salazar, that was at the start in 1928, just a Minister of Finances, ended up being a dictator in Portugal in 1933 because he was a good professor in university. He was the youngest professor in University of Coimbra. University of Coimbra is like the oldest university in Portugal. It's from the 13th century, and for several centuries was the only university that we had in Portugal. So every people in Portugal between the 13th century and the 20th century studied in Coimbra. So this guy was a teacher of economics and politics, and he was part of a movement of Catholics also connected with the university. They were basically professors and academics that were Catholics and conservators that wanted they wanted a regime that was law and order, basically. So in 1933, he ended up, this guy that was Minister of Finances, he ended up being Prime Minister. His name was not Prime Minister, he was President of the Minister's Chancellor. That was his name. But he ended up being the dictator of Portugal since 1933 until 1968. He ended up, when he died, he didn't know that he was not a dictator anymore. Nobody told him. There was this kind of theater going on where they substituted him with a professor of law. So there was this kind of academic dictatorship that ended from 1933 till 1974. Between this period, in the 50s, in the Second World War, Portugal was neutral, but was working with both fronts. So we were at the same time receiving Nazi gold that Nazis were robbing from the Jews, but at the same time we were receiving Jews that were going to America, you see? So Portugal at the same time was collaborating with both parts. And so we ended up without being in that war. We were like this, like Switzerland. Of course, Portugal back then was more near, I said, the fascist regimes, because it was right-wing, conservative. They didn't want the kind of development of economic development was corporativist and centralized in Lisbon. So everything in Portugal have to pass in Lisbon to make things done. For example, if you have a company and you wanted to buy a machine for your company, you had to write a letter to Lisbon asking if you could buy that machine with your money. You see, so they were controlling the economy. They had there was no freedom of speech. Also, they had a political police called PID that basically every newspaper in Portugal have to send them their edition for the next day to PID. So the PID was giving they call it here the blue pencil. Blue pencil is basically when you cut parts of the news that you think that is not well okay with the regime that's on. And but the worst part for Portugal was after the Second World War, every European countries were giving independence to their colonies in Africa. You see, Africa was all controlled by France and England and Portugal. And we had, back then, we had 3 provinces. One is Guinea near Senegal. Another one is Angola, that's huge. Angola is like 4 times the size of France, for example. And it's like 20 times the size of Portugal. And we had another province in Mozambique that's to the Hindic. So we had this kind of Vietnam War that went for more than 19 years, almost 20 years of war. I had several uncles of mine that were in that war. I had several histories of uncles of mine who killed people in that war. Uncles of mine who run from that war. For example, in Mozambique, I had an uncle that run from that war and went to South Africa and lived in a refugee camp in South Africa, for example. But basically, all the young people that didn't went to university ended up in that war. So it was like the same with the First World War, but this time in Africa, in the field that nobody knew. Most of these people were very young, 18, 19, 20 years old. They were given a Kalashnikov and say, okay, now you go to Angola, to the middle of nothing, and you have to kill people that you don't know from anywhere. And this war was going on for several years. And in the beginning of the 70s, even in the militaries, there was this dissatisfaction with the war and with the central regime that back then was Salazar. Salazar was not giving independence to these colonies. He's saying that these colonies were part of Portugal, even if they are in another continent, in this colonial way of thinking. Every other European countries were in fact giving independence in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Most of these African countries were giving independence and were being independent. Portugal was the last of the European countries to give independence to these colonies. So in 1972, 1973, there was a lot of military soldiers that came from the war without, imagine, a arm or without a leg, and they were not giving the pensions. You see, the money they were having to give because they were veterans of war. They were not receiving the money because the country was going bankrupt. There was the start in the 70s of this globalized capitalism world that we all know. But Portugal still had this old regime that was our country isolated from the rest of the world. Basically, there was these two tryings in Mozambique and Guinea from the generals to give to Marcelo Caetano. Marcelo Caetano was the guy. There was Salazar, and then next to him was Marcelo Caetano. Marcelo Caetano was in power just for 6 or 7 years, and it was the guy who was back then a vice president of Salazar, and was a professor of law. It was a professor of law specialized in medieval law, medieval Portuguese law. So you see, these two dictators were two university teachers. That's quite odd, because you see Mussolini and you see Hitler and you see all these generals. And in Portugal, you had this, like I said, like this kind of academic dictatorship going on. It's quite hard in terms of, when you look at all the other countries, they are super militarized. And here you have a old guy who speaks with a tiny voice and is very strange. He doesn't have any friends. He lives alone. He never get married. He was a strange person. And basically they give two proposals of peace in Mozambique and in Guinea in 1972 to Marcelo Caetano, and he refused them. So these militaries create a movement called Movement des Forças Armadas. I don't know how you say it in English, but it's movement of the militaries. And they started to make a plan for a coup, a military coup that happened in 25 of April of 1974. That was the date that ended up with that regime that started in 1933, that it was called Estado Novo. There was some people who said that's a second republic. I don't think that's a republic, because there was just one political party. And republics, if you're just one political party, for me, that's not a republic. But there are some historians that say 1933 to 1974 was a second republic. I don't agree with them, but in history, you know, it's always open to the elements and open to every historian. Each historian has an history, with a political history. And in 1974, we make this military coup. That was a coup that only 4 people died. Basically, the tanks entered in Lisbon. There was this song that was being played on the radio. That song was like the key for the start of the revolution, and was a song recorded by Zeca Afonso. Zeca Afonso was a singer in Portugal that lived for several years in Paris because he was not loved by the regime, as you see, and basically that was the key for the start of the revolution. The revolution was beautiful in a way because there was flowers being put in the machine guns of the soldiers. So the populace, the people ended up in the street in Lisbon. The only guys who get killed was basically lost bullets were coming from the office of the political police. That political police that didn't have any informations how they are going to deal with this. So basically they started to shoot some and 2 people died in the streets and 2 people from the agents were killed. And in that day basically the revolution was making in one day. Of course, we had the 2 years after were turbulent period in the history of Portugal, because several revolutionary movements were going on, and there was a lot of, I would say, it was not peaceful. But in 1974 was in fact the last revolution we have. It was almost 50 years ago. Now we have finally freedom of speech. Myself, I was born in 1981. That's 7 years after the revolution. I never lived in a country without freedom of speech. I don't know what is to live without freedom of speech. I have that luck. For example, my father didn't have that luck. My grandfather didn't have that luck also. And basically, you don't go to jail in Portugal if you make a painting or if you wrote a book that's not. I'll say this as not satisfied with how things are going on with the country. You don't, but until 1974, yeah, you some people ended up in jail. A lot of artists went to Paris. That was the New York of the era. No, it was Paris. So they lived abroad, and the people. And here you have this regime that get lost in time. I say in the 60s get rotten from the inside, and you could see was not going to last that long. So so that military coup was, well, we're not the populace who make the coup, were the militaries, and that coup was connected to colonial war. Okay, that was the main reason why they made that coup. If you say, I'm not very lyrical in that sense. I'm not very lyrical in the sense of the militaries love the people and they want to make good to the people and etc. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I know they made the coup because they were not okay with the colonial war. The war was going for way too long. And the proposals of war being not accepted by the president of Portugal was a big betrayal to the militaries. You see, because these 2 proposals of peace were made between the generals and their enemies in Mozambique and in Guinea. So the proposal was basically, there was going to be some elections for 5 years, still with the old regime, but during that 5 years was going to be a smooth changing of regime, ending up in, after that 5 years was going to give independence to those countries. And but the president didn't accept that, so the militaries were not also, they didn't want to continue that war, and that war was quite long for a country to fight. You see, almost 20 years of a war in any war is way too long, because it's one generation and that being consumed by that war, you see, and you have an entire generation of Portuguese people. Some of them are parents of people who are attending here, and some of them are, I believe every person here maybe has one person that was in that colonial war. I don't know. Yeah, it's very normal to have that, because that was not a choice of you of going to the war. You have to go to the war if you don't have any studies and you are in the age of going to the, we here call it going to the troop. It's when you make your military service. Back now it's not You don't have to do it in Portugal. You can option if you want to have a military. For example, I never answer to the letters that they send me to present myself, and that happened 20 years ago, and I was never. They never went to the military. Never went to my house. Oh,
But it was still.
yeah, it was still. I'm old, so it's it was still mandatory.
When did it stop to be mandatory? From people that were born since 81.
I was born in 81, so it was the last year where, like, for example, I have several friends of mine that went to the military service.
It was in 2000 that stopped being mandatory. Not for people like.
Yeah.
People who were born in the 80s.
No, I have friends that went there.
Desculpem lá, mas deixem-no acabar.
No, it's okay.
Depois pode passar.
I prefer to be interactive. But yeah, but it's not mandatory anymore. But we all have here in our room, in the room we are now, family that was in the war. For example, I have at least 7 uncles of mine that returned, and they never want to show the traumas they have from the war, but they have several traumas. You still have here in Portugal, you see stuff like when you have fireworks, you still see people in the cars like frightened because of the shots of the war. It was a very violent war for an entire generation, because you see, we live in Europe, in Portugal, like in the west of Europe, going to the deeps of Africa. That's I don't imagine how it could be for you to give you a rifle and go into the depths of Africa and fight a war that you are not believing in it. Most of the military, they didn't even know what was going on, what they were fighting for, etc. They knew that all the other European countries were giving independence, but you could not talk about that in Portugal also, because like I say, we didn't have freedom of speech. So during decades, you couldn't write what you want, and then you start to make auto censorship in those kind of regimes. Like, the artists know what they can design, the writers know what they can write. I have it's not a friend, but it's a person I know from Portugal. Is a very old person that used to work in newspapers in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in Jornal Notícias. That's the main newspaper here in Porto. And he told me, like, he started to write the way the political police wanted him to write, without the political police telling him how to write it. So you start to have this auto-censorship going on, because people don't want any problems. And back then you still have a very strong Catholic morale going on in Portugal. And this very strong Catholic morale, it's enemy of development. Like in Portugal it is, because we didn't have the thing that happened in Northern Europe with the Protestant revolutions that happened in the 16th century. We never had that. We had Inquisition here, we had torture here in the Middle Ages for people who were Jews, or people believe were witches, or pacts with the devil, that kind of stuff. So that's still very impregnated in the Portuguese psyche. So it was not very hard for that dictator Salazar to make a regime that was Catholic, was not urban at all. Portugal never had an industrial revolution, for example. The same revolutions that they have in Germany or in England in the 19th century never happened here. We had a country that for several years were basically made of farms, and the big city, Lisbon, that was the capital. All the other cities were like tiny cities, provinces that were cities that were capitals of agriculture, farming regions, basically. So, and most of the people live in complete ignorance, because most of the people just studied 4 years. Okay, like my grandparents, for example, my 4 grandparents just studied 4 years in school. Okay, so they went to school with 6, they came out of school with 10, and with 11 years old, 12 years old, they were already working, and they work all their life like that. Of course, they say that 4 years of school are way better than the 12 years of school that we have nowadays. But it's not true, because it was an education based in memorization, not based in the critical thinking. You see, people were taught just to memorize things and regurgitate tell those things, and never had like a critical thinking about what was going on. So for several decades, from 1974, Portugal changed a lot, because there was this freedom of speech. We entered in the European Union. Portugal started to have this development. I'm not saying that Portugal is basically stagnant in terms of economics for 20 years now. So we don't grow, but we don't grow. Portugal is like the same that was in the beginning of the 21st century. You see, we had a huge development between 1974 and the ending of the century. Portugal started to have like roads, and the cities start to develop. People started to have more years in school. They started also to hit Portugal back then. People were very small, you see, and there was several cases of malnutrition. People didn't have very rich diets, so they were very small, rachitic, with several propension to diseases, you see, and with a huge propension to alcoholism also. Portugal is a big producer of wine, and there still is a lot of alcoholism in Portugal. People here, like the good Catholics that we are, we always say that's not, I like wine, but I don't drink it that much. And we use little words to characterize we say, you a little wine, or a little cognac, or a little whiskey. But in fact, Portugal is a heavy drinker country, you see. And back then, Portugal, because of that revolution in 1974, Portugal started to have this development that was quite huge in the history that we have. And the fact that we have 3 revolutions in the 20th century is remarkable, because Portugal is a country that was basically founded in the 12th century. And during all those centuries, we only have 5 revolutions, you see. And of these 5 revolutions, 3 are in the 20th century. So for several centuries, we had a king from the 12th century until the 20th century. But the 20th century for Portugal was, and for other European countries also, was a great period of change in politics, in the change of political regimes. Like, for example, there are still several countries that are monarchic, like in Thailand, in Europe. Normally, they are the developed countries of Europe, and that is strange. Like, you see, England is a monarchy, Holland is a monarchy, Denmark is a monarchy, Norway and Sweden are monarchies. And it's, but like, and these developed European countries, in fact, are of course, they are not monarchies. They are monarchies where the king or the queen doesn't have the power that they used to have in other centuries before. Of course they are, but they are monarchies. And that's strange why the richest countries in Europe are still monarchies. And then you have countries like France or Italy or Greece that are republics from the 20th century. You see, those countries that are republics, in fact, are Catholic countries, not Protestant countries. And that is strange, because you could think that could be the opposite, like the not so developed countries will be monarchies and developed countries will be republics, but that's not what's going on. It's the opposite. It's the richest countries in Europe that are monarchies. And so there's still this debate if these monarchies, what they mean, because they are monarchies, but you have freedom of speech in all these countries. In England or Netherlands or Denmark, you don't have any problem for anything that you say. You're not going to end up in jail. There are like states where the constitution is the most important, the most like in Portugal is the most important. So we have this monarchy, we have this democracy going on. In 3 years, going to be 50 years of our democracy, and I think for me, I think it was very good for Portugal to have this finally this chance of these people of Portugal that were exploited for so many centuries. I think Portuguese people were in fact not being taken care of by the elites in Portugal that came from the Middle Ages. They are weak, to be fair, and they are very egoistical. And there was never this effort to make the country develop, because a country just develops if the people develop with the country. If the people get more education, they have access to well-paid jobs where they can live, in fact, with their families or not, or living alone, etc. But yeah, these are the 3 main revolutions that we had in this. Like I said to you, these revolutions are very Iberian. They are very Portuguese, because there's still this joke. The joke is true that in the 25th of April of 1974, the tanks were stopping in the lights, in the traffic lights. They are stopping in the red. You see? No, this is true. They're coming in the avenue, and it's a revolution, but you have to respect traffic lights. And that's very Portuguese. You see, people who were asking, it's a revolution going on. It's I believe so. And yeah, there are several histories about that day, about people who came in their pajamas to the streets. There's this writer called Luís Pacheco that they ended up all day being in his pajamas, just in the streets speaking with the people. And it was a beautiful day for Portugal, I believe. The thing with the flowers in the riffles is a very powerful image. That happened because there was this lady who was selling flowers in the streets that started to put flowers in the riffles of the soldiers. And these photographs ended up, for example, Spain, next to us, they had these revolutions like 2 years after us, because in Spain, 25th of April, maybe most Portuguese don't know that. They don't know the impact that 25th of April was in Spain, because Spain still had this dictatorship of Franco, this military, very violent regime of Franco with the civil war. And for example, our history compared to Spain is super peaceful, because the history of Spain is a bloodshed since the Middle Ages. And they had a huge impact, that images that run up the world of a revolution where no shots were being shot, where the militaries had the flowers in the rifles, in the Kalashnikovs, and people were in the streets like supporting the militaries. And the regime, basically the dictator was not killed. In a very Portuguese way, he catch a flight to Brazil, and he ended up being a teacher of laws in Rio de Janeiro. It was a
teacher.
It was this Marcelo Caetano was his specialty was law and history of law in Portugal, history of medieval law. So he ended up in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, giving classes, and he lived there the rest of his life. Most of the ministers, nothing happened to them. They were not really killed or sent to prisons or tortured. Basically, the regime handed, and every people, I think they understand that. And I'm not gonna paint this image of Portugal being super peaceful, etc. Is not what I'm trying to say. But what I'm trying to say is maybe sometimes the revolutions don't have to be like bloodshed. Sometimes they are. There was the German philosopher Hannah Arendt. She has a book about revolutions where she defends the theory that if a revolution is not a bloodshed, it's not a revolution. that can be something that we can discuss. If a revolution is a revolution without deaths, without killings, without you killing in that way, maybe the first revolution that we had, the 1910, where we basically killed the king. So that is a start of a revolution. In fact, when you killed the head of the king, like I said. But yeah, it's I don't know what more can I say. It was a pleasure to I don't know if anybody wants to add anything. But yeah, it was a pleasure, and thank you.
That was great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Queres desligar o teu micro?
Onde é que é? Já agora? Ah, é aqui.
Thank you.
Assim,
Thank you very much.
podemos usar só este, nós.
Sim,
Eu
sim,
até
sim.
viro. Espera aí que está aqui. Vocês podem, assim eu até
Ah,
viro,
aqui na
assim
mesma?
o pessoal pode ver que está aqui gente
Ok.
e que não está. Pronto, não sei se querem fazer alguma questão tanto ao João como ao Thanom. Há pouco queriam falar, agora não há vontade para falar.
I wanted to ask you if it would be possible to have access to that presentation that's given about talent art.
We're making live transmission on Facebook, so it will be there. You
Okay,
can
so
see.
we can have
Yeah.
access.
You can say him if you want to speak something.
Yeah, if you want to speak something, Thanom.
Yes.
Yeah. If you want to speak something or like have some question for.
Well, I'm very impressed when you're talking about the revolutions in Portuguese, in Portugal. But I mean, in Thailand, we are 80 years, but we still under the control of the systematics of monarchies, military. But we like to learn much more from you how we can deal with the thing by using art or anything. Because now, I mean, the people who fighting on the street now is the youth about 11 years old. And today, I mean, just happened. A youth about 12 years, 2 persons has in jail because they criticize, they're talking about the king, the monarchy. This is still a big problematic. I don't know how to say it, but we are still fighting. We have to keep our power. We have to keep our energy to join with the people. This is quite a terrible sad for me. I mean, we are keeping fighting with the enemy. I can say the enemy who got everything, military, police, and bureaucratics to control us. This is, I want to say, I mean, I like to learn from Portuguese people. I mean, as much as we can. This is the way.
Just this baby. So I think if you don't have question, you have.
I think one of the particularities of the Portuguese Revolution
It is.
I think that's maybe a connecting point with the situation in Thailand. It's like here the military were the ones that had the initiative to break the system and to turn against the system. It's like that institutions.
Yeah.
And in doing it without that bloody way of doing things, that it's not, that it's also a very particular thing for a military organization to do, for the flowers on the and I don't know how can that be, how can in your situation, Thailand, I don't know the trigger. How can things, who can start, you know, because like you here and the real people, how can you enter the system?
No, because, for example, João was talking about that, you know, that Elena was talking about the military being not submitted to the dictators or to the power, to the monarchy.
The initiative of the revolution was the military.
Yeah, but of course, as João talked before, you have the context of the Second World War, after the colonial war, and of course the military were not happy because they were fighting for something that they don't believe, and it doesn't make sense at that time.
Yeah.
No, but of course, yeah, and they were, and many people died, and of course they don't wanted. No, of course, and as he said, like the system was rotten already.
Yeah.
So it was not so difficult to the military to destroy the dictatorship. But of course, we didn't talk about it. During these 50 years, we had a lot of revolutionary movements working on underground and illegal and making the opposition to the dictatorship, no?
Yeah.
And you have like the Communist Portuguese Party, like Luar, anarchists, the many movements, and many of them they were in jail. Many of them they were sent to a prison in Cape Verde, no, in Tarrafal.
Cape Verde in Peniche also.
Yeah, and of course the military they didn't start it, no. There was a work of revolutionary movements for 50 years, and of course mixed with the global context, the things emerged to that point, no?
Because I think after monarchy, there was until the new state, Thanom, there was all these years of mess. After monarchy, it was just like João said, mess.
Yeah, a lot of governments were falling in a very short period of time. Yeah.
Still the monarchic systems of families and influences were still trying
Still there,
to keep their power.
Yeah.
And then dictatorship came.
Yeah,
You know, like in the
but
first
for
years of
example,
Republic were
but
just,
for example,
bloody.
we were talking about this, the military, and what is the trigger point to have a revolution to change the system, no? And compared to Thailand right now, because they have the military
What's the
government since
dissatisfaction?
2014 or 15, right?
14, the last time 14.
Yeah. So, and I remember I've been there 2 years ago, and I was speaking about the king, asking like really normal questions, and some guy said, "Hey, you don't speak about the king in the street. We can have problems." And I say, okay, but we're just talking about some pictures I saw on internet. So they are in this dictate. For example, Pisitakun was in jail for 4 times. To come here, I need to write some letters. He went to court. And he just came here because he had the support from the city, blah, blah, blah. But he even going back to Thailand, he can go to jail or he needs to go to court because he was making protests for freedom of speech. This free arts is making part of the movement. But the thing now is, and I think it's your question, no, what can be the trigger point for Thailand to change this military system? No, because it's not just the people that wants to change, because they can be killed, they can be in jail. It's what in the global movement of the world can make the direction for the revolution. And this is what I was talking with you, and it's something that even you said to me that you don't know what can be the point.
Yeah, it's because it's kind of like a bit complicated for, you know, like you have like military coup and you have this kind of like monarchy, because for example, like it's actually the monarchy and military coup is kind of like in another state, like different part, right, in history. But in this term, it's like the monarchy used the military coup to be controlled by to the people, and then they produce like the new government from the military coup. It's kind of like you know, the system is like when you fight, you cannot fight to the point, but you have to fight to the military first. You have to fight to the law. You have to fight to the this kind of like connection that the monarchy made it, and then like this kind of thing is really hard to take out this kind of thing.
That's interesting. I think that's one thing that is coming to my mind is that when we had the 17 there, that I feel is that there was this revolution. It was not about the militaries. It was not about taking the power. It was always in some way obvious that it was like a transition moment into a democracy, and maybe that's why it was not a death, like a bloodshed, and maybe that's even why people that were in the governments before weren't arrested or tortured, because it was like a transition moment, you know. In fact, militaries only wanted to end the war, and
most of them don't have political foundings. So.
And some of them, they were in the new government.
Yeah. Some of the previous.
Yes, some of the people that were in the government of during the last dictatorship years, they were elected for the independent elected government. No, you had Pinto Balsemãos, Sá Carneiro. So
and the power was given back like in a soft way without anybody.
The president now is the son of one minister of the dictatorship, for example. Baltasar Rebelo de Sousa was the education minister, and he's called Marcelo because he was a nephew of Marcelo Caetano. That was the last dictator, and now he's the president. But that's when you have a very centralized country in one city. Everybody is cousin from one another, so that happens. That happened also in Germany. After when was Germany, the regime of Adenauer, that was a prime minister. I think 70% of his cabinet were ex-Nazi ministers, and that's West Germany in the 50s, in the 60s. Because in Germany it's very difficult to know any person that have any connection with family with the Nazis. That happens a lot in many different countries also.
So I mean, I have to go to Portugal to talking about politics. Because I'm talking in Thailand, it's like it's a lot of monarchy network to scrutiny, and it's like a big brother. I mean, it's horrible because I mean the king He doesn't care because he has the palace in Germany. So he just come to visit, to stay in Thailand or in Bangkok just 3 days, and then he came back to Germany. And also, his daughter, he has a palace in Paris, and then who cares? But he got the network. Also, he himself, he got a big army guard for himself, separate from the Thai army right now. And now he dealing with the Thai commercial banks to merging his asset and Thai commercial banks. And also the tycoon in Thailand have to sacrifice for him. People, let's say people is like a dust. He doesn't care. As Pisitakun talking, is very complex and many layers now. Like today in evening, he using his army, not police, but dressing like police. This is terrible. When we are talking, it's about how to fight or how to win revolutions. But it's like now, not in the history. We have to prepare. I mean, I don't know, but we have to stay and fight. This is.